Hey, hi, I'm Fred Shaw, your mayor here in Carpinteria. I'm here today to talk about Measure X. A lot of people ask, what is Measure X and why do we need it? If you look in the distance there, you'll see a crane. That crane is cleaning out mud from the mudslides and the fire and flood that we had last January and December. Well, that speaks to the issue of infrastructure. If you would look at almost any street in town, what you're going to see, you're going to see cracks and little holes and stuff like that.
Is this actually a street or a private street here?
Right here is a private street, but all the streets in the town are remarkably similar in that regard. But what wears out streets is driving on them, water, and sun. We've obviously, after the floods and generally, we've had a lot of all of that here in Carpinteria. Now, one of the things that happens is these streets were brand new 50 or 60 years ago, and they had a good long life, but over time, they wear out. When the city decided to do something about that, and that's one of the pieces of infrastructure that Measure X would speak to. When the streets start to wear out, they need to be repaired. We had if you grade them, we were up in the good area for most all of our streets around town. But over the years, obviously they deteriorate with wear and tear. One of the trucks that'll be pulling the mud out of what that mud retrieval, that crane is doing right now, one of those trucks driving on our surface streets is about the same impact as 2,000 or 3,000 cars. Now, if you think about that and think about the fact of that kind of wear and tear added to the normal wear and tear on our streets, our infrastructure, at least our street surfaces, are really suffering. But let's remember, that's just part of the issue. Infrastructure is our streets, it's our curbs, it's our sidewalks, it's our gutters, it's all of that. It's our drains. Everything has to be considered. Back in the 80s, we had specific funds designed to pay for that, taking care and maintenance of that. But they never did, at that time, they never added sort of a cost of living to those costs. Okay, so now we're heading towards the beach. We're going to turn on 3rd Street, and that's speaking specifically of what has happened over time to our roads. All of our roads used to be graded good. Now the majority, 60 to 65% of our roads, are considered fair to poor. If you look at 3rd Street, going down 3rd Street, you can see what sun, water, and just traffic has done to this street. And many, many of our streets look like this, especially when you get into some of the residential areas like this is. What has happened is the city, over the years, has only a finite amount of money to spend on repairing streets and those sorts of things. And as I said before, things like curbs, gutters, sidewalks. In the 80s, I'm
sorry if the camera shot's not great, but we're
bouncing we're bouncing around, right?
Because the roads aren't that good.
Because the roads aren't that good. But in the 80s, the city put together specific funds out of the property tax that we get back from the state and the county. They put together specific amounts of money to be dedicated to maintaining our streets, sidewalks, and everything else. Well, what ended up happening was there was no cost adjustment for as the years passed. So what might have cost in 1987 might have cost, $100,000 to do an entire street, now might cost maybe $500,000 to $1 million. Well, that's obviously, since we don't have kind of a cost of living for our infrastructure, that means that money has to come from somewhere. The city has managed to budget pretty darn well to take care of some of this stuff. We've made sure that our major arterials, Carpinteria Avenue and Linden here, have been fairly well taken care of. We're turning now on 6th Street. But as soon as you get to streets like this, when you look at the streets, there's lots of cracks, repairs that need to be done. And now we're going towards the Carpinteria Children's Project, which brings up yet another cost that wasn't necessarily anticipated when they decided on those funds and set them at a specific amount. And that is, the city or the state would change the rules as such. Now we have what they call ADA requirements, or, you know, it's from the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that means that we have to have sidewalks, and you can see the sidewalk there. We have to have sidewalks so that people in wheelchairs and with mobility difficulties can travel down those sidewalks. We have to have specific curb areas that prevent water from going into the landscape rather than on the street. And we have drains. We'll be probably passing one of them fairly soon here, that by state law are required to have certain kinds of drain covers, filters, things like that, to protect the ocean from water draining into the ocean. All of this adds to the expenses that are all part of infrastructure. And it's constantly changing. As new laws are passed by the state, or as roads, whatever, deteriorate themselves, the city has to fund it. Now with Measure X, right now, this speaks to another issue. Here we have a homeless gentleman walking along the street. Just one more issue that probably wasn't so obvious back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but certainly is now. And that's one more thing that the city needs to have funding for, that our coffers just weren't designed to cover at the time when some of these funds were designed. Anyway,
Measure X would increase the sales tax?
Measure X will add 1.25% to our sales tax. Right now, our infrastructure, which I've been talking about, the city has funded about $500,000 a year specifically to do things like make sure that Linden and Carpinteria Avenue, Via Real are still pretty well paved and taken care of. But we haven't had enough money to take care of all the smaller residential streets because it was never thought about that when the original funds were designed to cover maintenance of our infrastructure. So every year, at least according to all the experts, we just had a pavement expert in for council about 2 weeks ago, all those other improvements or maintenance things that we need add another $1.5 million or more to our budget each year that the city doesn't have. So in order to cover those costs, one of the ideas was coming up with a general sales tax, and that's what City Council decided to do. Now that sales tax, the nice thing about it is normally most sales taxes, a city gets about 1% of what they pay into the state in sales tax, the state and the county. A sales tax that's local like this, 100% of that tax money comes back to the city, which means we can apply it to things like our infrastructure that we see. Now, as we're moving towards some of our bluffs area and some of our open area. Now again, it was designed to have maintenance for that, but maintenance gets more and more expensive. It used to be years ago, as we head towards one of our parks, Viola Fields, it used to be years ago, the city would pay about, in the maybe $10,000 range back in the 80s and 90s for water, to water our fields and to water our parks. Well, now, just the cost of water alone for the parks that are in the city, our parks, our playing fields, things like that, is over $100,000 a year. That means that a place like, and we're coming up to it here now, like Viola Fields, one of our popular sports fields, and we'll move in a second, the money to maintain that has gone up exponentially from what it was when it was first built. But the city, when they built the park, or when they originally designed the city and they built all the parks, they put some money in. That's part of, again, your tax dollar pays for maintenance of these things. But everything, be it the city, be it water, be it maintenance, whatever it is, there's an increased cost to it. Okay, so now we're at Viola Fields. You can see out here, this is one of our major parks for people playing soccer, baseball. For kids, it's busy as all get out, especially during the late afternoon and evening hours, and pretty much all summer. It costs a lot of money to maintain our parks. This is one of about 13 that exist here in Carpinteria. When we originally pulled out funding of the budget to maintain our parks, the cost was far less than it is now for maintenance of these parks. But we still have to maintain them because the kids use them, the public in general uses these parks. And again, this speaks to Measure X. This is all part of that infrastructure and parks and other amenities that we've not only grown used to, but a city requires and needs. But prices of all of that go up, and unfortunately, the funds for paying for it haven't necessarily risen with that. That's why Measure X, which is that 1.25% sales tax, 50% of that will come from our locals, and 50% of that will come from people who are visiting, which makes it a much fairer use of it, since our visitors use the same streets and the same parks and the same amenities that those of us who live here do. But we do have a beautiful park system. You obviously couldn't pick a much better place to play soccer or baseball than this. But again, like I said, the cost has gone up and the city can only afford to do so much, and we don't want to lose the ability to maintain these amenities. So that's where we are. And we're going to go probably from here. We'll probably drive to another park to show you another park and some of the amenities that are offered at that park. That'd be Monte Vista out there on the other side of the freeway. Hi everybody, instead of Monte Vista Park, we decided to go to Memorial Park. Just wanted to point out we have a brand new play structure there. The city was able to get a grant for that play structure, but the grant didn't really include the funding to keep that play structure up. And if you look around the park in general, you'll see barbecues, you'll see a well-manicured lawn, you'll see trees that are taken care of, and all that costs money. Money that the city has always had. Back in the 80s, they actually got enough tax money back to pay for it. We don't anymore, so this is money that adds to the expense of running the city. What Measure X will do, aside for providing help to rebuild and hold and maintain our infrastructure, it gives us money to help maintain our parks. And our parks are so well used here in Carpinteria. And it would be a shame to have amenities like this suffer because the city couldn't fund them. And unfortunately, that's a reality of life in 2018, is everything is more expensive, and the city has to come up with ways to manage that expense and provide everything that all of us as Carpinterians enjoy. And like I said, as you look around the park, it's a wonderful place for a family to spend an afternoon or an evening, or kids in the morning playing on the structure, sitting in the shade under the trees. But unfortunately, none of that is for free. Okay.
And here's another view of Memorial Park. It's quite nice. I haven't seen it lately.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, we're here at the Carpinteria Library. This has been here a whole lot longer than I have, and probably the most used building in town. Unfortunately, over the past few years, funding for the libraries from the state and from the county has dropped significantly. Now the city has picked up some of that funding that was lost, and a lot of it has been picked up by the Friends of the Library, their little used bookstore is right behind us, right in front of that, or behind that pocket park. And we've been able so far to keep the library open with the hours that people are used to. But the bottom line is, we need money that we don't have in our budget right now, and the library needs money to continue to be funded and to keep it open for the public and for residents, kids and adults who use this building a lot. And how we're going to get that money, the best way as far as our council is concerned, is a sales tax, because not only will the sales tax give us money for our streets and roads and all of that you see behind us, or in front of me, but it's also going to give us money to help fund the library and keep our library open, and keep little pocket parks like the one behind us, keep pocket parks green and friendly for people to go out there on an afternoon and sit and read a book. These are the things that are important to a city. These are the things that the public wants. Hi. These are the things that the public wants and things that the city wants to be able to give them. But that takes money, and Measure X is what we need if that money is going to be forthcoming. Yep, this is a great library, been here a long time, and people love it. Now we're going to talk about another big piece of the funding puzzle. So this tax measure would raise about $2.3 million. Obviously, what we're hoping that about 1.5 million of that will go into our general infrastructure, and then we'll have more money for our park maintenance, we'll have more money for the library. But another thing that factors into that is our sheriffs. For many years, Carpinteria had its own police force, but then it became too expensive. So we contracted with the sheriff, which gave us access to a lot of services that as a small city police department we didn't have. Well, over time those costs rise, and the city contracts every few years with the sheriff's department. Now, for the next 3 years, the sheriffs have signed a contract with the city that will raise the cost of the sheriff's department about 10% of their costs every year. Now, that seems like a lot, but in order for the sheriffs to sign a contract, they have to be able to meet certain standards before they are willing to do that. The city has worked with the sheriff's department and designed sheriff's coverage to give us the services that we need here in the park, and still manage to keep the costs as low as possible. But again, like I said, those costs are going to be going up close to 10% a year over the next several years as a result of that contract. And if we want our streets, our city to be safe and well taken care of by our sheriffs, who are some of our most important first responders, then we have to be willing to meet the contractual demands in order to do that. Again, those kind of monies are the things that will come out of Measure X. So in closing, I would just say what Measure X means to the city is improved roads, improved sidewalks, curbs, keeping up with the ADA and stormwater requirements that the state holds. It gives us extra money to be able to support and maintain our parks, support and maintain our library, and keep our streets and everything safe with our sheriff's department. And thank you for listening.
Hey, thank you, Fred.